and welcome to all of you out there. First of all, thank you to David Summer, and my congratulations to all the finalists. You've just been listening to that. So just to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Fulder, Chief Executive of Publishers Licensing Services, the UK's collective management organisation servicing publishers. We've in fact just been celebrating 40 years of service to the industry. We're delighted to be the platinum sponsor for this year's ALPSP conference. And I'm only sorry that we're not all able to be together in person yet again. We have our hopes up high for next year. I'm very pleased to have the support of Nikhil Patel, Senior Publisher of Open Access Journals at OUP, who will be helping with the Q&A at the end. But now it is my honour and privilege to introduce our very distinguished keynote speaker for this year's conference, Dr. Harlan Krumholtz. He is both a cardiologist and scientist at Yale University and Yale New Haven Hospital, and a leading expert in the science to improve the quality and efficiency of care, to reduce disparities, to improve integrity in medical research and avoid wasteful practices, all objectives we can subscribe to, I would suggest. He is director of CORE and has published over 1,000 articles and 3 books, and his achievements have been recognized in numerous ways, too many to list here, but his work is very well recognized. As the founder of medRxiv, a non-profit preprint server, we're going to hear Dr. Krumholtz talk about the early days of preprint services in clinical medicine, some of the challenges and the opportunities, and he will also consider an imagined future where preprints and peer-reviewed publications work together to strengthen science. So thank you very much, Dr. Krumholtz, for joining us today, and I will turn over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and I don't know, how distinguished can I be if I've kept you all waiting? I'm so sorry about that. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you. This is a great honor for me and an opportunity to converse about some of the changes that are occurring, some of the changing norms in the ways in which communication, scientific communication, is transforming. And I'm particularly focusing on, of course, medical publishing at this point. Let me just say, in terms of disclosures, I have no relevant financial disclosures for this talk. I'm a co-founder of medRxiv, as Sarah mentioned, and a volunteer. I'm a member of the medRxiv oversight team. My institution, Yale, receives no revenue from medRxiv, and medRxiv is more recently supported by Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. It's housed within Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory and is also in partnership with BMJ, although, again, it's an independent effort. I want to say, as I learned about your organization, I come to you with great admiration. I recognize that there's quite a diverse group of people who are attending the conference, and of course, not all from medical publishing. In fact, maybe not even the majority of it, but I hope maybe the insights about what's happening in this area might provide you some benefits and can be useful to you. So in any case, I recognize that that's the nature of the organization, and we'll try to speak to you with regard to what's relevant. This is an organization that knows very well what preprints are. I'm just doing this as a level set. That my understanding of a preprint, a research manuscript yet to be certified by peer review and accepted for publication in a journal, an online platform. The server is an online platform dedicated to the distribution of preprints. I come at this with a lot of experience in submitting manuscripts and in publishing as an author. I've maybe had 1,400 manuscripts accepted at journals and have an H-index over 200. I say that not for any reason other than to say that I've had a long string of experience. I will say with humility that if I've had that many papers accepted, I probably had 4,000 papers rejected. So I'm very familiar with rejection from journals. and the process of publication, and have been at this for quite a long time, thinking deeply about the enterprise as a whole. I've also was editor of Circulation, Cardiovascular Quality and Outcomes, one of the American Heart Association journals. And so for almost a decade, had experience on the other side, as on the editorial side, and also on the publishing side in interactions with the American Heart Association. I've also sat on a variety of editorial boards and advisory groups. And I think this has given me a sort of peek at all different angles on the publishing industry. Like I said, all the way from author to editor to advisor, and an appreciation of the challenges for publishers, particularly nonprofit, on the nonprofit side, and from big and small. I want to also say, and I just to be invited to this group and to show this piece that I wrote again, I show it in a constructive way. At the end of my term as an editor, I wrote this piece, The End of Journals. And again, it was as much a reflection on my own experience and ideas as it was a serious consideration that journals should end. I didn't, and I don't hold that opinion, but in the same spirit of a modest proposal, not as artistically or ingeniously, but just to sort of poke a little bit at our own profession as I was leaving it as editor. And I said, for hundreds of years, medical journals have served as arbiters of the quality of medical research. That may go for all science, truly. But the traditional peer review publication models frame the hierarchical gateway to publication historically in the hands of experts is at odds with the ubiquitous democratization of data and information in the 21st century. I went through it's not a long piece, you may be interested in it, but I sort of went through a litany of things that I thought we don't do well as editors of publications. And I talked about the process being too slow, too expensive, too limited, and too unreliable, too focused on the wrong metrics, and too powerful. And I could go into all these, but that's not what this talks about. Finally, I said too parochial, too static, and too dependent on a flawed business model. But I concluded that we've arrived at a juncture where medicine and science need new vehicles for the dissemination of knowledge. These new approaches will enable us to separate the wheat from the chaff in order to better serve the public, which is in the end our ultimate goal. The question for all of us in medical publishing and for those who consume medical knowledge is how would this best be accomplished in a new world that's flat, digital, and transparent? But, I also came at this, as I've said, with, from the experience of an author and someone who's trying to generate knowledge that will bring insight to others, will help make the world better. After all, I'm a cardiologist and a medical researcher. So my work is intended to be pragmatic and practical and to make a difference in the world, not just to push forward the gates of knowledge, which in other fields admirably people are doing, but this is about, in the end of the day, are people living better lives and longer lives. And so I had the experience of waiting. I mean, that in our field, it can be a remarkably long period of time between your initial submission of a manuscript and its ultimate publication. And that may be for a variety of reasons. I mean, one of the reasons may be that you're trying to get in a series of journals that don't want you, and that takes time. And the way in which it works is we're unable to generally reuse peer reviews. We have to reformat. We have to begin the process anew with each journal generally, and so it can take years. And even within the same journal, I mean, one of the top journals in health services research gave us a response within 6 months that said revise and resubmit. We revised and resubmitted. It took us a few months to address a very long list of requests. And then a year and 3 months later, we still couldn't get a decision out of them. And I still to this day don't understand what the issue was, but we would be pinging the editors repetitively and just told that it's in progress. Finally pulled from that journal and then published elsewhere. But all of us authors, all of us scientists, medical scientists have had the experience of having something that we're excited about, wanting to share, and being stymied by the weight process. I've also been concerned with my work. I have thematic work within my field, but I've been interested in metascience for a while, and in the study of our research ecosystem, of which publication is part of it. And I'm very interested in publication bias, people who do studies and then somehow don't find it to publish or report the results. We did a series of studies on clinical trials. So as you know, clinical trials are experiments on human beings. They represent a situation where you've gone to a person and asked them, would you be willing to be part of a scientific study, with the expectation that their participation is going to produce some generalizable knowledge that will help others. And often there's a wide range of interventions and risks often that people incur by being in trial. There may also, I believe, benefits, but it's a big deal. And we're looking at this study, publication reporting clinical trial results across academic medical centers, so done within top centers in the US. And here, this curve reports the time, both the time to publication and the percent that are published. So on the left, you see published or reported studies, and in the y-axis, you see the time to study completion. And you see at 20 months, or let's say 24 months, almost 2 years, at 2 years, you're only at about 30% of the studies have been published. Now, these are experiments on human beings that are completed. The authors have, and the investigators have even registered on clinicaltrials.gov, the registry of clinical trials, that the study has been completed. But 2 years later, only 30% of them have been reported. And by the way, on that website, that clinicaltrials.gov website, our government website, you can put results. And this meant that it was neither in that website, nor was it published. And you can see, even if you get out to 5 years, it looks like almost 40% of these experiments on human beings are never reported. These are important studies, and we have a large publication bias and a large time lag for them to be put out there. We looked at another study, time to publication on completed trials. The median time to publication was 21 months in this study. We looked, another colleague of mine, Peter Bach, was looking at this in oncology. The median time from a press release referencing trial results, I mean, the trial was over, and they've actually had a press release go out that referenced it, was almost a year. So 10 months. And again, so this is a very important to me, as I'm appreciating what's going on in the field, that in many cases, people finish studies and never even tell anybody what they found. Even when they do tell people, it often takes a while for it to get out, to be debated, discussed, understood. And one of the ways that it's being shared is by press release. And so, and after a press release, before there is a publication of record, it can take up to a year. Now, our group has been interested, like I said, in improving the research ecosystem. And we've been spending a lot of time on open science. We founded this Yale Open Data Access Project, YODA. And we've also been working with journals on how to get more content outside the firewall, and what could be business models that make that work, so that there can be more transparency and communication, and means by which there can be greater open communication and even public vetting and discussion and elevation of papers, so people recognize, even when they've gone through the peer review process, there's still much to debate and discuss, as we all know. So in the course of this, though, with focusing on that problem of publication bias, lots of things not getting out, slow to be shared, and the process of science being stymied sometimes, because maybe that's things that are presented within scientific meetings, but if you weren't at the meeting, or you didn't hear about the meeting, I mean, there was no place to look for exactly what was done, and that product is often ephemeral. It's hard. Slides may have been used, or it might have been a poster, but it really becomes almost rumor and hearsay after that. And then I started, I had made a presentation at Howard Hughes Medical Institute around what was going on in clinical medicine. They're more life sciences oriented, and had run into Ron Vale and Jessica Polka and Harold Varmus and others who were thinking hard about preprints. And they had formed this organization called ASAP Bio that was talking about preprints. And of course, the original inspiration comes from this guy at the top. So Ron is at the far side and Jessica's below him. And just to the right is Paul Ginsberg, a younger period of his life, where as a physicist, he and colleagues had come together and had launched Archive. Well, as you know, Cornell owns Archive, really the preprint server for the physical sciences, and has become really for anything. And then I met this guy, Brian Nosek, who's also at the bottom next to Jessica, who's a psychologist at the University of Virginia, runs Center for Open Science. And Brian spends a lot of his time thinking about reproducibility in science, and I highly recommend him. Be a good keynote for you guys if you haven't had him at some point. He's a really terrific thinker about these issues. And Brian had created sort of an incubator of preprint servers for different groups. He'd come to Yale, I heard a talk, and I was sort of sold that, clinical medicine really needed to be thinking about how to put early research out into the public domain for community vetting and discussion, and to foster collaborations and communication, and to help to accelerate scientific progress. And, ASAP Bio was, trying to, as they were selling the idea of preprints, we're talking about priority claims. There's some evidence that that kind of visibility can increase citations. For young investigators in particular who have work that's in the pipeline of publication, it enables them to show evidence of productivity and to receive feedback. And to me, this was sort of gaining ground. And again, I showed you what that article Peter Bach put together that had some information about oncology, press release to publication about a year. I was also moved by what was going on with the SPRINT research study. This came out of NIH. It was a study of intensive treatment of blood pressure, really marvelous study. They did a great job with it. And the study ended early because the result was positive. On September 11th, 2015, NIH holds a press conference, in which they come out and they say, hey, this study was positive, and it was very positive. And, this is going to be a big deal. The head of the NHLBI, great scientist and leader, Gary Gibbons, says the study provides potentially life-saving information. New York Times runs a lead story by Gina Kolata, well-regarded science reporter who is, lower blood pressure guidelines that sort of pushes this idea about this notion about what's going on with SPRINT. And then, but SPRINT comes out, they do this in September. SPRINT doesn't come out till November at the American Heart. And yeah, it mostly echoed what was in the press release. But again, it's just sort of making me think, is this the best way to do it? Where you have a press release with no clear products, you're telling people that it's positive. It takes several months for a paper to appear, which is actually better than what we saw in those oncology examples. But was this really the best way to conduct the science? I mean, there was no artifact for, if it was good enough to go to press release, they obviously had some sort of briefing packet internally that they believed in, and they knew that was going to lead to the paper. So why not let people at least start talking about it, even if they were going to say that this is peer review? And so, essentially, even on clinicaltrials.gov, they have first posted, they started the trial in 2010, but they don't post the first results until December. So they have the press release in September. They don't post the results on clinicaltrials.gov, nor does the paper come out to November. And that kind of delay was sort of thinking, like, is that really the best approach? So I'd written this piece with Eric Topol for the New York Times to both try to be positive about the trial, but also to signal that maybe that there are better ways to do this. So, what we said was the problem is that many details of the study have not been released. It'll be months before the study is presented. This is after the press release. We wrote this just days after the press release, and possibly even longer before it's published. We didn't know how long it would take. And what we said was kudos to the scientists who conducted such a large, complex, important study with what will likely to be life-saving consequences for a condition that now can be treated easily. But now the medical community needs to adopt a new approach in situations like this one to disseminate life-saving results in a timely, comprehensive, and transparent way. And our belief was that lives depend on this. Mike Lauer from the NIH, Eric Topol and I wrote a piece for Lancet where we really raised this point, which is it time for a pre-publication culture in clinical research? And again, sort of just trying to say, that this is normative in other fields. And I do a lot of work in data science in medicine. And if I can't depend on preprints to keep me up to date, then I don't know where I would be. I mean, if the peer review publication, and let me just say this clearly, the publication of records serves a very important purpose. And I'm not arguing that journals would go away, but what I'm suggesting is that there is this world where that there's no longer that kind of pressure on the peer review side with regard to the timing, that there can be some public vetting in parallel as the editors are spending time trying to create a peer review publication. And of course, economics is a great example of this, where, you know, when economists finish a paper, they'll post it on MBR or SSRN. It goes out for comment. It becomes sort of what everyone's talking about while the paper's winding its way through the peer review process. Peer review publication still means a lot in economics, but so does the opportunity for preprinting. So at this time, I'm spending some time with bioRxiv. Also, I'm intrigued by it. I'm talking to Richard Seaver, one of the co-founders of bioRxiv at Cold Spring Harbor, and saying, you know, maybe it can be that bioRxiv can start to house some clinical research papers, and we try it out ourselves. When the guidelines were updated for hypertension in 2017, the AHA made a big deal about it. They had a lot of press about it. It was like November 13th. I had gotten wind of the fact and had felt that the guidelines were probably going to be pushing down the level that was considered for hypertension. And this was going to be a big sea change. We were going to change from 140 over 90 to 130 over 80. And so, I'd been working with a junior colleague, and the question he was asking, and we began to ask together, which, how's this going to affect the number of people who are labeled with hypertension? And isn't that an important insight that should accompany the discussion about the guidelines? Because sort of like, well, what's going to happen the next day, and how many people are going to be affected by this? And so we started working on a piece and started doing the science and pulling this together. And we submitted it. It was sort of like ready around the time the guidelines were being released. So we had a choice. You could submit to a journal, and it would take a long time to get through, or we could post it for discussion and show people our work. And again, just like the work that was being presented at the AHA meeting, the scientific meeting, because all that's not really peer reviewed. The posters, the presentations, that's based on a paragraph. Somebody screens it, but the truth is it's not really peer reviewed. There's no depth to it in the process of being accepted to the meetings, at least in our medical meetings. They aren't like the IEEE where you're submitting a manuscript, you're submitting a paragraph. So, we just thought, well, let's go out with this. So we submit to bioRxiv, as you know, within days it can post. So we impacted the impact of the 2017 ACHA guidelines. We submitted to bioRxiv after the guidelines are announced. So we're sure we now know, now the guidelines are pushing this down. We had prepared this in advance. In anticipation. It could have been different if they hadn't moved the threshold. This paper could have been about what would have happened if they did, but we went for it. We'd spent the months before developing this, and so it came out for discussion, and it was quite nice. I mean, this was the preprint, the impact of the guidelines on the prevalence of hypertension, eligibility for antihypertensive therapy in the U.S. and China, and this was published. It was posted just right after the guidelines came out. If they came out on the 7th, this comes out on the 13th. And look, it gets a lot of attention, picked up by 45 news outlets. The Altmetric score is 459. It's tweeted by 149 people. But again, it's not peer reviewed, but just like the content at the meeting, it's pre-peer reviewed. And by the way, the AHA has press conferences and promotes the content of their meeting, which is pre-peer review stuff for discussion. And I have problems with that, because in many cases you're promoting things based on a paragraph or a poster, and there's no depth to it. There are no methods. It's not archived. You can't tell exactly what it is. And the idea was that this is something a little bit better. And then when this eventually got published in BMJ, as you may know, on the preprint site, bioRxiv site, if you look up our preprint, you can also see now published. So that the publication is out, and you can link to it. You can click on it, and it'll take you to it. And this, it turned out this came out. This was accepted in April of 2018, and comes out in print in July. And so almost a year later, it's in print. And by the way, this got a lot of citations and attention too. So interestingly, the preprint comes out at the time that the guidelines change. It elicits a lot of discussion, and the preprint's there for people to see. And then we actually took a lot of that discussion and we strengthened the paper. The conclusion didn't change. I'll show you in a second, but we strengthened the paper, and all's well that ends well. You know, just comparing the conclusion, I won't read these to you, but just basically the conclusions are almost identical. It's a little more compact on the BMJ side, but it's basically that, there's going to be a marked increase, but we show the quantification of that. But the process of this helped us, in addition to the BMJ reviews, the public reviews that we got, the comments and so forth, also helped us improve the ultimate publication of record. So around this time, I am, I'm huddling with our group and saying, it's nice bioRxiv to want to do that, but they're not really optimized for clinical a preprint server. And so, we need to be thinking about maybe there's a need for one of these things. And I was intrigued by what, like I said, Brian Nosek had put together. And then there was this 8th International Congress on Peer Review and Scientific Publications. Some of you may attend this. And I had been asked to give a keynote at that meeting, and without any specification of what the content would be, which is always nice. And so I, in the days leading up to this conference, I started talking to our team, our internal team at Yale. And I said, I think we should do a preprint server. And I think we should announce it at this meeting and see what people have to say about it. But we should just go out and do it. And, this is one of these foolish things you do where you're not quite sure how you're going to do it exactly. I mean, I knew what Brian had this incubator, but it just seemed like too good an opportunity to say that time has come for medicine to have a really optimized clinical research preprint server. So at that meeting, I end up, speaking to, I don't know, there are hundreds of people from across the spectrum of medical publishing. And I announced that we're going to do medRxiv. You may notice it's spelled a little differently. I mean, so there were changes that occurred between that presentation and what eventually came out. And, I will say people didn't stand up and applaud and say, this is a wonderful idea. There was a mixed response. Many prominent people at that meeting stood up and made very good points that raised concerns about the potential harms of a preprint server in medicine. But also at that meeting, I end up talking to Richard Seaver and John Inglis, again, from Cold Spring Harbor, and Theo Bloom. I'm sitting next to her at a dinner and she's from BMJ, and also a lot of experience in publishing, and terrific individual. And I don't know, somehow out of that meeting, it sort of hatches this idea that we could build medRxiv and drop the A so it looks more like bioRxiv, and we can build it and on top of the kind of experience and even some of the infrastructure that exists within bioRxiv, and that would accelerate our progress. And the fact that we were could align with bioRxiv and BMJ, even though it's totally independent, not journal specific, would enhance our credibility. And so we were off the races, although because of a lot of the concerns that are being raised, it ends up taking us almost 2 years to end up launching it because we want to do it the right way. And so it ends up coming out as medRxiv, Cold Spring Harbor Lab, BMJ, and Yale as being co-founders, and Joe Ross and I from Yale, and John and Richard, John Inglis and Richard Seaver from Cold Spring Harbor, and Theo Bloom and Claire Rawlinson from BMJ come together with the support of our own organizations, and then with a wonderful team from Cold Spring Harbor to ultimately get this thing going. And what it is community-based, not-for-profit, free for everyone, with author-centric services, not products or publications, publisher journal independent. All papers are screened by experts with rapid posting. We aspire to 24, 48 hours, and then you can add another one and another one up until the time of publication. So you can have additional versions as you improve your manuscript, with transfer pipelines to and from journals, and content APIs for feeds and social media accounts, and text mining and data mining resources. But one of the major things that came up that was really important and continues, I'll show you, to be issues is that how do we mitigate the concerns and risks? And I want to say both those are important, because sometimes people have concerns that I don't think are well-founded. But in order for us to gain acceptance, we have to listen carefully and respond appropriately. And then many people are raising concerns that actually do represent risks. And we always want to avoid unintended adverse consequences. We have to think hard about how do you build this so that it's sort of a free-flowing platform, but at the same time, it's not promulgating content that might cause harm, and that in some way we would be complicit by being part of that. So, we started thinking about submission requirements, posting criterion, that we would only take research articles. This wasn't going to be about opinion pieces, that we'd have to establish the screening process. And we needed to signal a need for caution when scientists and non-scientists read and review preprints. We're essentially going to have to educate our field, because in many other fields, people are very much used to the idea of preprints, but not in clinical medicine. And so, and we have to make sure that people understand them in the proper context. And so on the webpage, in sort of bright red letters, we put, caution, preprints are preliminary reports of work that have not been peer reviewed. They should not be relied on to guide clinical practice or health-related behaviors, and should not be reported in news media as established information. Now, you could argue that often even peer review isn't established information, but here we're doubling down on trying to make sure that people are careful. Now, experts who read work in their own field are obviously very able to conduct their own peer review, but we needed to make these global broad statements that would apply to everyone. We say this article is a preprint and has not been peer reviewed. What does that mean? It reports new medical information that has yet to be evaluated and should not be used to guide practice. That's our basic stance here. And we urge journalists and other individuals. This is all on the website, not that, that there's a consequence to violating these norms, but we're trying to tell people, we urge journalists and other individuals who report on medical research to the general public to consider this when discussing work that appears on medRxiv, and emphasize it's yet to be evaluated in the medical community, and information presented may be erroneous. We also said, unlike a preprint server where the only thing is I've got something, I just want to post it, we felt we needed to have submission requirements so that people needed to follow the ICMGE guidance, including author names, contact information, affiliation. Couldn't do this anonymously. There need to be funding and competing interest statements. They need to have ethical approval, IRB ethics committee oversight, study registration when applicable, study protocols, data sharing, and so forth. And so, we're doing checklists. We're not trying to encumber the authors, but we're saying we need to have we can't have chaos here either, and we need to be able to have some standards. Now, what happened with medRxiv as we launched then was, you can see in these early days at the very beginning of the graph, we launched in June 2019. So, there's this little growth. Now, in part, the monthly posts, this axis is built for the data in the entire figure. But if I were to blow this part up, it still represents some substantial growth in these early days. And we were growing faster than bioRxiv was at a similar point in time. So we were quite pleased, actually. This was mostly word of mouth. We had no PR budget. It was just about folks like ourselves submitting and trying to spread the word. And then, we hit the pandemic. And, you get to the beginning of the pandemic, and all of a sudden, medRxiv became a very useful place for people around the world, initially mostly from China, then China and Italy, and a wide variety of other venues, to be able to post content for people to examine and discuss in a variety of ways. Remember, the counterfactual here is not necessarily peer review, but throwing stuff up on Twitter or social media or just websites that were sort of ephemeral in nature. And the fact that things would be archived, people could look at what people had, that it could be discussed more broadly. I mean, it would seem to be very appealing. This shows you the posting that comes in per month. We had this sort of spike in the spring of the pandemic, but the cumulative number of manuscripts continues to grow. And, there are a lot of, the CV here represents COVID. So there's a lot of COVID papers, no question, preprints. But, and they still represent, a little more than half of what we're getting in. This is July, most recent time, 2021. But it's also growing among different kinds of disciplines. this shows you up till now, if you take everything posted on medRxiv, about a quarter are infectious disease, 20% are epidemiology, but we also are covering the entire spectrum of medicine, and there is growth occurring in all these areas as people sort of catch up. I mean, I make the argument, I mean, there's no reason to think that the pandemic, which is an enormous threat and deserves our attention, is more important than a lot of other health problems that rob people of years and deprive them of full quality of life. So if urgency is important in the pandemic, why wouldn't it be important in cancer or cardiovascular disease or you name it? And if this is a useful way to foster communication, then it should be useful across. People have asked us about retractions. We don't really call them retractions when they come from a preprint, because never really formally published as a paper, but let's say withdrawn manuscripts. John Inglis sort of taught me this distinction. But we haven't had many, 0.2% either overall or just COVID. And I think that's a pretty good record. These represent ones that have been ultimately shown then to have a real big flaw, to have been done either fraud or some major problem. We haven't had to withdraw anything because we've been concerned that it got through and is causing harm, and now we're pulling it. The ones that get pulled generally are ones that have had, like I said, some fraud or flaw, or shown that there's some major issue with them that it is that meant that they should never have been posted in the first place. As of 2021 July, we had 6 million abstract views, 700,000 full text views, 1.7 million PDF downloads. That's in the month, and we've since the beginning we've got 12,100 institutions, 145 countries. Top countries are USA, UK, India, and Germany. and just it's used in a lot of different ways. I mean, I say it's not about whether or not people get a preprint and then get a publication. Some people are posting preprints to just get comments and to understand whether they should even proceed along this line of work. Other people are finished with something that was modest and preliminary, but they want to be able to share it. Again, that helps with publication bias. People have something to share. Sometimes it's about something that's very preliminary or partial that they want to cite within a grant application or for a job application. I mean, there's lots of ways that people are doing this. And so the preprints are not meant to be considered publications of record, but there are sometimes when it's being used in by very good research groups to get the discussion going while it's going through peer review. So this is one of the most important papers I think that came out in the pandemic from the Recovery Collaborative Group for which I have great admiration, run by Peter Horby and Martin Landry, and with a whole great team within the UK that have really pushed forward the frontiers of knowledge and helped us so much. And they, in this paper, they showed dexamethasone has a 17% reduction in adverse events and actually mortality. And so, this is a really important paper, but, interesting. So this is comes out in New England Journal, but it was posted in medRxiv on June 22nd, and they had a press release that day. So again, this is what I think works well. They were going to have a press release no matter what, whether there were preprints or not. And because they had results and they thought, we need to share this with the world. We found out what this is. We're confident enough in it to talk about these results. So they have a press conference. And importantly, people were dying in the hospital, and they had done a very good clinical trial. They're experienced investigators. They did a great job. And then they said, so we're going to have a press conference. We should probably post what we're talking about. So they posted the manuscript, and, that was terrific. And it got a lot of views, got a lot of discussion. It was being vetted publicly. And even on Twitter, I saw people would have questions and they would send them to Martin, and Martin would respond. And so while it's going through the journal process, there's also this very public process of discussion about this going on. I mean, interestingly, they're a very good group. The left is the medRxiv main figure with mortality, and on the right, the New England Journal's is. And the New England Journal changes the y-axis range, but beyond that, it's basically the same result. And the confidence interval nudges slightly, but the point estimate's the same. And so, you can ask the question, well, how big a deal is it June 22nd to July 17th? And I'll say, in those weeks, while it was winding its way through peer review at New England Journal of Medicine, there was a lot of discussion. The public was able to, the scientists were able to vet and invest and engage. And by the time it comes out in New England Journal of Medicine, there's a high degree of comfort with this publication, and then people can compare the preprint to the publication, and we're off to the races in terms of applying the knowledge. And also, other investigators who are studying dexamethasone on June 22nd have, several weeks where they can know that this is going on, and that may affect how they're designing or thinking about their own research. The recovery trial has ended up using this for a wide range of other purposes. So I'm almost getting to the end here and then open to questions. But I want to say that there still are a lot of concerns, though, about preprint servers. This preprint went up this week. SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccination associated myocarditis in children. This group took advantage of the CDC's Vaccine Adverse Event Report System, VARS. And then they basically went through it and did some analysis about how common was myocarditis in children this age. And then they speculated a bit about whether there was a net benefit for kids in this age to be vaccinated. And as you know, that tends to elicit a lot of attention. Look at this altmetric score. It's almost 10,000, picked up by 18 news outlets, tweeted by 17,000 people. There's a lot of churn about this stuff. And this gets a lot of attention. And what they said in the preprint was further research into the severity of long-term sequelae of post-vaccination cardiac adverse events is warranted. Quantification of the benefits of the second vaccination dose and vaccination in additional national immunity may be indicated to minimize harm. It's a very circumspect conclusion, but the idea that it could be that the risk of myocarditis in certain young age group, particularly boys, could outweigh the benefit of the vaccine is a hot topic and is just much discussed by many people. But and this is just more saying. So they provide some numbers around it. But then what happens is that, I don't know, this international group, there is this government representative, someone who was elected by a region in Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is an American politician, businesswoman, and she's by consensus, a far-right conspiracy theorist. She ascribes to this thing called QAnon, who serves in the U.S. representatives. And she's sort of an anti-vaccination, and it is just a figure that attracts quite a lot of polarization, and she causes a lot of polarization. And then so she tweets about it, and we should stop the insanity about vaccinating these people. And then in the Telegraph in the UK puts up this tweet without suggesting that this comes from a preprint, but that teenage boys are 6 times more likely to suffer heart problems from a vaccine than be hospitalized from COVID-19. A major study has found. And this would be in violation of how we would suggest a preprint is framed. But the Telegraph does this, and maybe that's what got Representative Greene to do her tweet. But so then, the Twitter sphere lights up where, people are weighing in. There's a break. Clearly there's a breakdown because MedArchive graced The Guardian and the News with false headlines. The foreign policy, meaning MedArchive, was either insufficient or too porous. This guy says, good thread on myocarditis preprint. I've been very critical of preprints that are too quickly disseminated in the media, and this one is no exception. He says also, I think the vitriol directed at these authors is wrong. A few thoughts to follow. What I said back to them on Twitter was that, do you get that the discussion about the preprints is exactly the purpose of the preprints? So that when someone claims something, you can look at the source and experts can comment. Now, we have a screening process. Actually, 15% of the preprints that are submitted to MedArchive don't get posted. And that's for a variety of reasons that I've gone through. Some of them are that they don't have an IRB or they're not a research article, but a lot of them, not some of them, are because when we look at them, we say, you know what, this is so questioning conventional wisdom, and if it's wrong, it could cause problems, that it's better off going through peer review. So we see a fair number of preprints that we say that, this is so counter to government policy. It's not that it doesn't deserve, we're not saying it's wrong, but we think that it's going to be better to be vetted first before it gets put up on our preprint server. So we actually do have a process, but in this case, there's already a lot of discussion about myocarditis. There's question about risks and benefits, and we didn't feel that this one met that level to keep out. We also said in an era where this I also wrote on Twitter, but in an era where dissemination of information, it occurs in so many ways, social media, press release, rumor, and more. And peer review, well, I will just say, you can publish almost anything on peer review these days. At least on medRxiv, early in the debate, there's a document open to the world and we can discuss what it means. I also said with the others, I respectfully disagree that this was a problem. I said the intensity of the debate about it is exactly what we're trying to foster in science. And that some outlets push beyond the science is a problem with media, not the idea that we're posting preprints. And that, you know, that information can be coming from anywhere. Richard Seaver, who generally has my back on this, we work together. He's a co-founder, as I said, of medRxiv, channeling me, HMK Yale bit here. The argument is the data are there to be debated and challenged. This is our argument about the preprint server. Since the preprint has appeared, almost every analysis of the paper I've seen has picked up on its flaws. And one would hope these would be in peer review. And this is a chance for the public and public scientists to be able to foster the communication about this. And then he says, part of the evolution of scholarly communication requires, of course, acclimatizing people to this new norm. And I just want to get back to that. It's about this norm where there's to be this coexistence of peer review and publication of record and the ability to get early out research in progress for discussion, critique, to stimulate collaborations. And I say this is the important point. We're still in the early phase of clinical preprints. Norms are evolving, but science is being communicated in new ways. We urge the community to comment, engage, inform, debate, educate each other and the public about these contributions. So meanwhile, just to finish here, you know, we did a study about more than a year ago, and we found most of the medical journals were allowing preprints. So, you know, the peer review group publications were kind of coming in line with this. NIH is now allowing preprints to be in grant proposals, so many others are doing that. The New England Journal of Medicine, at the beginning of COVID outbreak, Eric Rubin, much kudos to him, said we encourage authors to submit their work for posting on preprint servers. They went positive on this to say, well, we're reviewing it. We want you to do that. We're not going to bias against you. We see this as coexisting, essentially. And then, of course, on Lancet, where they've got SSRN in their own preprint server through Elsevier, you know, I won't read this to you, but, you know, Richard Horton and Sabine Kleinert, you know, start talking about preprints with the Lancet are here to stay. And we believe with the appropriate checks and cautions, there's a role for preprints in the wider context of open science and knowledge exchange. We've decided to continue our collaboration with SSRN. I think we are at a juncture where clearly, you know, the cat's out of the bag. You know, this is going to happen, and it's up to us to figure out a way for optimizing this environment so that we can foster communication and the speed of it, but continue to strengthen peer review in a way that it still serves a very valuable purpose for the scientific enterprise. So with that, I want to again apologize. My fault. I know I must have just been giving such angst and anxiety to the organizers. Please forgive me for that. And I want to thank all of you for the honor of being able to present to you. And I hope we get some interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Harlan. That was certainly very provocative, lots to talk about. Nicole, would you like to put some of the questions?
Absolutely. Yes, yeah, the questions becoming thick and fast, Harlan, and all whatever anxiety there was fully paid back in such a wonderful talk. You would be hearing rapturous applause if we were in person, so I'm afraid you'll have to imagine it. So actually, the first question I might supplement with a little with one of my own, which is about scalability and sustainability of the medRxiv platform. Now, of course, we've seen that a little bit already in arXiv, bioRxiv, but the amazing growth that you saw, in part to due to the pandemic, the screening process that medRxiv go through is a little bit more rigorous than those other preprint servers. Of course, to do with patient safety and the other aspects that you talked about, governmental policy, etc. I'm interested to know, well, A, from the expert's point of view that are doing those sort of that screening, but also from your point of view as sort of who sit on that board of scientific leaders at medRxiv. How scalable you think that, if it continues to grow, are you going to start to see some of those delays in the screening process that the preprint was sort of designed to mount?
You've honed in on a really important issue, and one that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So we have a meeting once a week of the principals where we actually review maybe 20 or 30 of the preprints that have been submitted that affiliates who've done the initial screening have flagged. And we've also have backup with some professional editors at BMJ who are sort of on staff who are also helping us. And this ends up in this early period of our growth to have been, it's resource intensive. The affiliates who have joined us are generally PhD or MDs, people with experience with science. By the way, we're looking for more. If anyone wants to spread the word, this is rapid screening and contributing to the community. We always consider medRxiv, by the way, of the community. It's not like ours. We don't think so much like we own medRxiv, but it's sort of something that should exist for the entire community. But what we're, I think, hoping in the process is that the more lessons we learn, the more that we turn them into FAQs and guidance, so that we're sort of gaining a certain sensibility about this. There's certain, I think even for the affiliates, it's something which makes you feel maybe a little uncomfortable. Like someone's out saying like, no one should get vaccination. We've got something that says, whatever it would be. If it's a third rail, if it's like, people are going to get shocked by seeing it. And we just feel like, this may be great. This could change this could win a Nobel Prize, but you know what? It should go through peer review because it's at such odds with conventional thinking that it could be picked up by fringe groups. If it's wrong, it could cause harm. I mean, that's kind of thing in our mind on the screen. But you're asking about scalability. I think it's about, trying to get people to have that proper sensibility. Now, I have not seen, like I said, we have not ended up having something go through our process, get posted, and then all of a sudden we notice like, oh my gosh, how'd that happen? And pulled it back. So I think it seems to be working pretty well, but if we want to grow this, you're asking a really key question. What if we get 10x this size? Can we maintain the same kind of consistency of that kind of screening process? And I think that will be an important challenge for us because, we would still want this to be light and rapid as you're suggesting. And so I don't have a great answer for you, except to say that we're spending a lot of time thinking about like, how can we maintain the way in which it is now, but if it gets to 10x, that we don't end up degrading the performance.
Happily, actually, that sort of leads it.
We will run over until about 5 to the hour because we did start late, but so we've got time for a couple more questions, I think, Nicole.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think I potentially could combine a few. In fact, actually, that last answer, Harlan, kind of leads into another sort of sustainability angle, which is around the funding. I know initially you mentioned that the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation is sort of provided. Do you think that scalability and sustainability is contingent on sort of how one sort of gathers funding for the project?
Yeah, I think we always had this feeling like build it and they will come, and we're trying to build it in a way that is not so resource intensive. The high wire stuff and the platform itself requires support, as all of you know, in this group. But I don't think it's the multiple. There's fixed costs to be able to run this. At that point, you can handle large amounts of volume without, at the margin, it's not as much of an investment. I think it's more about the human capital, which is how do we manage this? How many people do we need? But I'm pretty confident that we can manage that piece. The Chan Zuckerberg's been great. They've sort of been hands off but supportive, and I think that there will be others also that would be willing to be supportive and continue to show value in the marketplace.
Yeah, appreciate that. And then we've had a couple of questions actually on the sort of press angle, and of course that's always been a bit of source of consternation for preprints in the clinical sciences. How things, and I think one of our delegates has sort of already recognised the idea that this already happens in peer-reviewed pieces. One can't necessarily control always how things are reported on. The delegate's kind of interested in your take on how efficacious this statement is. The one that sort of mentions that it's pre-reviewed work and not necessarily for clinical guidelines, but also whether the press during the phenomena of the pandemic have become more responsible in their sharing, as tagging things up as preprints or flagging, or understanding the sort of distinction.
Yeah, I think in overall, I've been really impressed by the press. Especially from the very beginning, we were engaging with them, talking with them, at least the high quality, there's a group of people who want to promote something, so it's not even actually about trying to responsibly report something. It's about trying to configure something for an agenda you have. That you're never going to be able to control that, right? But for the mainstream media who are professionals, that I was very impressed that they did a great job. My concern is the opposite of what you said, which is when you get things like Project Recovery and time again, you got this memory of, like, when it came out as a preprint and then it came out in the New England Journal, there was no real difference. That the press starts to slide back a little bit to make certain assumptions that preprints are higher quality than they are on average, right? So you get Martin Landry and Project Recovery, and yeah, I mean, it's basically the same in the New England Journal. Those guys are just pros. I mean, what they submitted to the New England Journal was ready to go. New England Journal makes it a little bit better, but really it's largely, you can rely on the preprint because they know how to do trials and they know how to report trials, and they've done it a million times. That doesn't represent the vast majority of preprints. The vast majority of preprints are much rawer, and also the process of peer review is one of sometimes pulling back in. I sometimes say the preprint's the director's cut. It's like unfettered. This is me as an author, what I would like to be able to say if I didn't have editors down my throat trying to make sure that I'm closely adhering to the data. And the editors are performing a very important service in that, making sure you're not overreaching your results. But the director's cut is sort of me allowed to say my own interpretation, and people have to understand that's a difference, right? It hasn't been pressure tested externally yet, and that's why this external piece is. So with regard to the press, I think we have to continue to be vigilant about pushing the message that responsible journalism requires you to say that this is pre-peer review, and that is entirely different than a finished publication of record that goes to peer review. Again, for this audience, I mean, we need to work together so that people understand, I hope, the value of both, and that this doesn't overshadow peer review in any way. They're complementary contributions. And I think that the world's better for having both. I wouldn't want a world where all of a sudden people say, well, why do we need peer review anymore? Because we got this. That would be an entirely unfortunate takeaway from this, because that's not true, in my view.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we may have to stop there, and there have been some wonderful questions, and but I think perhaps they might have to be served at this point by Twitter or our networking session. But thank you everyone for attending, and thank you all for the wonderful questions, and thank you, Harlan.
Yeah, I think the conversation will continue, and thank you.
Yeah, anyone can reach out to me anytime if they have particular questions. They're welcome to.
Excellent.
Contact me.
We're very grateful to you for all your time today, and thank you on behalf of ALPSP.
Thank you so much.
Now I'm aware that we have another networking session, which I think we've potentially eaten into, but there will be a link being sent out. I think I'm correct.
Yes, the link is in the chat.
Wonderful. All right. Hopefully, see a number of you in the networking session.
So look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible. Thank you all.